Hey everyone, how's it going? So in this video, we're going to talk about the defensive medals in Bug Fables. This, much like offensive medals, really is a pretty simple idea. These are medals that directly increase your defense stat, much like offensive medals directly increase your attack stats. This also includes medals that increase your HP in the middle of battle. Feel free to disagree with my opinion, but just be aware that it's subject to change when I see more opinions from you in the comments section down below, as most of my experience comes from doing solo bug runs in hard mode. Anyway, let's get into it. So in the last video, I received a lot of great comments which helped me get a new idea and perspective on certain medals. I do feel I've severely underrated last attack, and by extension, knowing how powerful it is both in ease of use and additional power, I do feel Last Stand well deserves its spot in the S tier. This medal increases your defense by 2 points when your HP is 4 or less. In a game where numbers generally don't get very high, 2 points is a lot, especially when complemented by the myriad of defensive medals in the game. Seriously, this will most likely be the part featuring the most medals. If you can get your HP down to 4 or less to activate last attack via medals like V's Heavy Throw or Hard Charge, this medal will make you extremely hard to knock out, notably because you get 2 of them from the final 2 bounties in the game. If you can't rely on redirection, most area of effect attacks don't do enough damage to actually hurt you anyway, so you're pretty good to just go and outlast. Definitely one of the best endurance medals in the game and an easy S tier. Joining it is my favorite defensive medal, Super Block Plus. If you super block an attack, you reduce the damage by an additional 1 point. When used in conjunction with Kabu's Spiky Bod, it also increases the damage recoil for direct attacks by 1 for each Super Block Plus equipped to Kabu. This is easily the medal I've used the most in any challenges that I've ever done. With how early you have access to both, very few attacks will be able to even hurt you, provided your guard game is on point, and it drastically reduces the need to heal throughout a battle. It's easily my favorite medal from an execution standpoint, as it really rewards you for having good defensive action commands, and when equipped to Kabu who can redirect attacks from various enemies and bosses, it's an absolute godsend. You haven't lived before you see Astophiles lose 12 HP from trying to attack in a single turn with no needed input from the player beyond defending yourself. And that's without mentioning just how well this medal likewise synergizes with back support, given that same method of redirection. This medal is good literally everywhere on anyone. Endurance-based challenges like the Cave of Trials and BOSS are no exception either, as it isn't HP dependent like Last Stand, and it overall just makes the action of super blocking feel so much more rewarding. I adore this medal to no end, and I'd be hard pressed to find another medal that even come close to being as good as this medal is. At least in a vacuum. Of course there are better thanks to some infamous combinations, but on its own, this medal is absolutely one of my all-time favorites. Another super block based medal, Block Heal also finds itself on top. What this medal does is it heals you by 1 HP for super blocking an attack successfully. If your HP falls to 0 in the middle of a consecutive attack and you super block again to heal, your health will rise from 0 to 1. Not a lot of attacks have this property to my knowledge though. Most attacks will just have the last hits just not register or end early. But some specific attacks like Sen's Stick Boomerang or Primeval's Dual Chop and Delilah's Mosquito Dive exist as exceptions. Truth be told, if you are able to super block every attack perfectly, you're basically guaranteed to just always live. It's like a pseudo super guard like that, which on its own I think justifies it being S tier enough. I really don't have much else to say about this medal though. It's no doubt an excellent medal, but I find myself preferring Super Block Plus more even when it's available. And aside from my blind playthrough, I tend to not be in a rush to knock out Zalmoth either. The following 2 medals will be mentioned together. To start, we'll talk about Prayer. This medal gives you back 2 HP for using the Do Nothing command. It can only be used once per round. A medal that gives you back 2 HP basically for free, meaning no items, no charms, or even block heal already sounds really strong. Especially in a game where you can turn relay and reap the best of both worlds if you choose to dump a bunch of medals on one bug. And 2 of these medals exist. That makes 4 HP. And then there's also the TP Restoring Meditation. And the Defense Boosting Reflection. And yeah, this medal goes from sounding super potent to honestly kinda unhealthy for the game's balance. I know I'm saying this here despite the existence of medal combos like HP Core and Lifecast and TV Core and TP Saver, but it really just speaks to how powerful just being able to get free resources is. With one prayer, danger strats become borderline unstoppable, as even the little damage you may take can be healed off, and as long as you stay under 5, you're golden. With 2 prayers, you can heal super fast, and once again, Kabu's redirection makes it extremely easy to heal, to say nothing of the move that literally blocks any and all damage from you, i.e. Bubble Shield. Even outside of bosses and endurance marathons, you can just get into a fight with a random enemy, use prayer to get some health back, run away, and repeat until all of your bugs are maxed out in HP. And thanks to Secure Pouch, you don't even lose any berries for it. Explaining this, items become basically obsolete when you're out in the overworld. Similarly, I don't feel like much else has to be said about Reflection, which increases your defense by 1 for 1 turn when you use the Do Nothing command. With 2 equipped to 1 bug, it increases defense by 2 for 1 turn. Not only can you get back HP for free with prayer, but you can also get heightened defense with Reflection, making it very easy to heal purely by making your defense even stronger. Honestly, a busted trio of medals all around, and we will likely revisit it when we roll around the meditation later on in this series of lists. Now, I'm not quite affirmative as to the general opinion of back support, but I do see it as a very good medal. With this equipped, the bug in the very back of the pack has their defense increased by 1 point. Being one of the first medals you have access to, it's surprisingly solid. Odds are if you're using this medal, you're using Kabu's redirection, and the factor of enemies attacking the bug in the back less no longer really holds this medal back. Enemies will straight up do less damage to you overall because their target just has 1 more defense point than the other 2 bugs, and your ability to stretch HP becomes much more potent. Even for 5 meta points, I think it's well worth the cost, at least compared to something like say Defense Exchange, but that's for later. What pushes this medal to S tier in my opinion is that for the types of challenges that I do, where you're only ever allowed to use only 1 bug for every battle, you can use this medal to weave in and out of danger. Be in the front and dish more pain out, or stay in the back and heal yourself. And if you're going to do the latter, you may as well also use the cheaper option over its more expensive sister front support. And with some bosses like Mother Chomper or Carmina that have strong attacks that can only be used on bugs in the front, it's actually got some good tactical merit, which I feel can really be explored further. All in all, it's a good choice to equip whether you're playing with only 1 bug or 3, and it's just one of those medals that I always typically use because it's such a good reliable option in general to guard with. Last of the S tier defensive medals, we're going to be talking about the legendary HP Core. Every 2 turns, this medal restores 2 HP to the equipped bug, or 4 if they're both equipped on 1. Remember in the offensive medals list where I said Poison Attacker is like a piece of Exodia? Yeah, I completely forgot about this medal, except here, it's more like 2 HP cores, a life cast on Leaf, and another bug holding Miracle Matter and maybe Berserker if you're fighting the Everlasting King. With this combination, you are literally invincible through infinite Bubble Shield lights and having a Berserk bug infinitely coming back from the dead. It is quite frankly the stupidest thing ever and completely ruins the game's difficulty if you choose to play that way. Even ignoring that absolutely asinine strategy that you should never use if you have any level of dignity and want to play the game with actual stakes, getting back 4 HP every other turn is an incredible boon. It takes a huge load off of having good blocking skill and makes playing in a more stall style even stronger with the Do Nothing medals. This is easily a contender for the best medal in the game and may even warrant being a tier above the other S tier medals here. It's that powerful. And oh, finally, we are moving down from the S tier. Lots of great defensive medals, I know. So let's talk about some A tier medals and down, starting with Defense Exchange. If you want a flat +1 defense at the expense of some attack, this medal serves that purpose well. It functions almost identically to back support though, except it only works on the bug it's equipped to. This introduces some drawbacks like nerfed attack power, also being locked behind Shay's shop and the Cave of Trials, but both of those are nitpicks. I really had nothing else to say about this medal thanks to back support, and I've already said all I had to. In continuation, we have Shock Trooper. Some of you may be shocked to see this medal this high up, but bear with me and I'll explain my reasoning to you. Shock Trooper grants protection from all incoming status elements and non-scripted damage from afflicting the equipped bug while they're numbed. The only exceptions are the Beast's 99 damage bite and the Wasp King's fire in Chapter 4. This actually has an alarming number of applications with the various turn durations makes the items whether it's a 1-turn Agaric Shroom or a 3-turn Shock Candy. Shorter durations make Kabu's taunt more effective as now it's completely immune to damage and can immediately do it again, while 3 turns is awesome if you're trying to stall turns with poison damage or heck any damaging status. And it isn't like it's only good for getting extra damage off either. You can likewise let medals like HP and TP Core do their thing while you're just chill and wait. So like if you're ever in a tight spot and you need time to just build up your stats, pop a Shock Candy in your mouth and just heal. There's also just that being numbed is a very scary status to be hit with in general, whether it's a Honey Nation's Honey Spit or especially an area of effect move like Nematosphe's Screech or Primal Weevil's Roar of Time. And not having to worry about being massacred by a, quite frankly, really hard to time block like either of those two is a pretty attractive prospect. You're free to just run it if you realize you're about to get shredded, or at least be able to pep talk in the case of Primal Weevil. All around, a pretty good medal to exploit status elements, which can be really making for some inventive if not dramatic fights. On the note of status element medals, Poison Defender is next on the chopping block. This medal increases your defense by 1 when afflicted with poison. It is the first defensive medal you have access to, and shows itself to be quite great. Even as early as Chapter 1, it's actually worth it to purposefully let yourself get poisoned by Spooter. You actually take less damage from trying to build up poison turns, and with the additional defense, you can super block attacks, and the additional defense enables you to block up to 3 points of damage. As early as Chapter 1, that's the most you ever have to worry about, which is kinda fantastic. Especially since then you only have that one option. And later in the game, for longer fights, it's a great medal to use in poison builds. In areas like the BOSS and the Cave of Trials, it's not necessarily the greatest, but in the case of bosses, you have access to 2 poison defenders in the entire game, and it meshes wonderfully with other medals like Reverse Toxin and Poison Touch. All in all, a very solid medal for what strategies poison enables in this game. Now for the medal I've underrated hard for the longest time, and it's Lifestealer. When equipped, your attack power is dropped by 1, but you restore HP equal to half the damage you deal rounded down. So for example, if you deal 3 damage in one hit, you heal 1 HP. It should be noted though that if you use Life Cast alongside this medal, you only restore a quarter of the HP proportionate to how much damage you dished out. It also only takes effect for the first hit of an attack that hits consecutively, so a move like V's Hurricane Toss will only heal her for the first hit, and the rest are still weakened by the attack drop, which, for all intents and purposes, feels pretty unfair. For as much of a nightmare that Monsieur Scarlet was as a boss when you fight him just at the beginning of Chapter 3, the medal you earn from defeating him feels like a weak reward. However, this medal has a lot more than meets the eye when used with certain moves like V's Needle Toss and Pincer, where only the first hit does 1 less damage, you heal, and then the subsequent attacks end up doing more damage. So instead of her attack stat being dropped by 1, V only loses 1 damage on her first attack, and the rest of her hits have neutral attack power, so she's basically getting the best of both worlds. In that sense, it's arguably better than Defense Exchange if you can get sufficient defense from other methods, as even if your max HP is low, you're effectively fighting with more than just the max. If played optimally, the little HP you would have because of how you choose to gauge your stats will only be able to stretch much further, because now you're healing from keeping up the assault. And combined with medals like Last Attack, you can potentially loot Danger, and it becomes a lot more similar to HP Drain's effect in Paper Mario 64. Which I think is a perfectly fair thing to say, because even if you do 0 damage, you still heal 1 HP for at least landing an attack, even if it doesn't hurt. And I don't doubt the potential this medal carries if your back is against the wall either and you're just trying to survive. There is definitely some merit for this medal in Berserker build, since that medal stops you from being able to block, and you can't use Kaba to redirect if you're using the medal on him. Or maybe you're using a poison build, and this medal makes it even easier for you to survive for longer. Heck, in this case, Reverse Toxin may end up being redundant. This may very well be one of the most slept on medals in the entire game. On the surface it appears situational, but peeling off the layers will uncover a medal that strongly mirrors the terror of the fiend it's inspired by. And dare I say it? What a better medal to close up the 8th tier than Lifestealer. This point forward, we're going to be catching some beats with Heavy Sleeper. Bugs with this medal equipped have the damage they take cut in half, heal thrice as much HP, and can no longer wake up from being attacked. Against enemies and bosses that don't hit too many times in one turn, this medal is a great way to get plenty of free HP back out of a few sleeping turns thanks to the Drowsy Cakes. It also, much like the Do Nothing medals, can make it easier to build up stats via the core medals or damage over time with poison inflicting medals. However, bosses that hit lots of times in a single turn will make this medal much more risky to use, as by then, the amount you heal may even prove to be matched if not exceeded. This is really only a problem when you only have 1 bug left though, as when you have access to all 3 of your bugs or even 2, it's not hard to use a Sweet Dew or Queen's Dinner to heal the status if you absolutely need to. Though the absolute biggest reason this medal is below Shock Trooper is just that sleep isn't as useful to exploit as Numb is. Numb is basically guaranteed to work everywhere you can think of, while being trapped in eternal slumber by comparison is never fun. Especially if you're up against a boss like Mother Chomper. There's also the case that this medal is only really good if you have a lot of HP to back it up. Otherwise, if a boss hits you enough times, you actually will end up losing HP and you'll be completely helpless to do anything about it. It is nice though that you can't be kept sleeping indefinitely because of an anti-soft-lock mechanic where you automatically wake up after enough turns. But yeah, some bosses like Delilah or False Monarch makes this medal dangerous to rely on, and I would not recommend it either. Don't get me wrong, it's a good medal, but it's a cut under its competition, especially Shock Trooper. Though it would be nice if you got back TP from this medal too, but I guess that's what TP Core is for. On the note of sleep medals, I'm quite fond of Sleep Resistance as well. With one equipped, it grants 50% resistance to the sleep status and protects you from the effects of self-induced sleep like through drowsy cakes. With 2 equipped to 1 bug, it grants total immunity to sleep. Early in the game, it gives you a fantastic means of healing large amounts of HP and TP using this medal on a bug to eat drowsy cakes with, and it comes in handy for blocking sleep when you really don't want to get hit by it, whether through numb nails, Venus buds, or Mother Chomper. When not relying on heavy sleeper, you can become super vulnerable to being stun locked, and only being 1 medal point, it can make for good filler. Same can be said for Numb Resistance, except what it offers defensively is even better than Sleep Resistance, thanks to there being a number of area of effect attacks that inflict numb, and it's more deadly as a result, while to my memory, all moves that inflict sleep can only target a single bug per action command. All in all, they're fairly decent medals, and they're definitely better than half the medals that grant status resistance. As to how they're better than Poison Resistance, Freeze Resistance, and Resist All, well, actually about the latter. Resist All is actually pretty good. It affords the equipped bug with 50% resistance to Numb, Sleep, Poison, and Freeze, while also protecting the user from self-inflict status elements from food. This medal's effect also stacks with other resistance medals, and for 3 MP, this medal is strictly better than just equipping 1 of each resistance medal to a bug. It does literally everything that the past 2 medals can do, but it covers more status elements and for a cheaper cost. But that being said, you may wonder, why is this medal only ranked in the B tier alongside the former 2? Well, unless you're in the Cave of Trials, the BOSS Rush, or you're fighting a boss with access to all the status elements this medal covers, you're often better off just granting yourself complete immunity to a status element over relying on a coin flip to protect you. And more often than not, the freeze and poison status elements you're protected from feel more like filler and don't really help you very much. It is good for its cost, and by the time you get it, bosses with multiple status elements to nail you with like Riz, Ultimax Tank, and Sleep Slacker's Delilah will plenty justify equipping this medal. Overall, a very much decent medal to equip. Up next is Front Support. This medal functions nearly identically to back support, increasing the defense of the bug in the front of battle by 1 point. Being available much later than back support, costing 5 crystal berries to buy from Shades over being free, and costing a whopping 8 medal points to equip, the most of any medal in the game, this medal has a lot to answer for. Yes, it protects the bug that gets targeted the most and the bug that does more damage from being in the front, which is good, but the problem is that this medal is niche at best when back support exists, being a cheaper option, and having the advantage of existing in a game where you can use redirection like Kabu's Taunt. Even if the bug in the front is going to get targeted the most, it doesn't matter when all attacks that only target a single character will always hit the character in back anyway. Now all this being said, does this medal have an objective advantage? Yes, notably how in a solo run, you don't have to hide in the back to maximize the benefit of healing. And yeah, that's literally all I've got. This is a medal I almost would have put in a lower tier because its advantages are great in a vacuum, but it's outclassed. But hey, I think B will be fine for it. Though if you wanted to put this medal in C or even D tier, I really could not blame you. So let's see, to end this chain of B tier medals, let's talk about Tardigrade Shield. For 2 TP, your defense is increased by 3 and you become immune to all status elements. If for whatever reason you don't have access to Bubble Shield Light, this is a solid alternative. The extra defense allows for being able to weather out charge attacks decently well, in addition to thwarting Scarlet or Mother Chomper's healing if need be. And in long fights, it can buy you precious time for medals like the Core medals or Miracle Matter to activate. It's by no means top tier, but it's very serviceable in game, and with Leaf's superb power when Idrate is online, it's a decent alternative if you want to drop V for the true powerhouse of Team Snakemouth. And now, we've reached the end of the really good medals. From here, they're not so good. Freeze Resistance, much like Numb and Sleep Resistance before it, protects the user from being frozen. The reason this medal is ranked lower than the former Resistance medals is because as dangerous as being frozen can be, the Watcher and Delilah are the only significant threats that can potentially freeze. And in the case of the latter, you're honestly better off just taking the freeze and running Status Mirror to turn the status on her instead. As far as protecting you from being frozen from items like say ice cream, you are arguably better off using Queen's Dinners on yourself, because freezing items are not competitive in restoring stats, and it's actually better to just try using Frostbite if you really want to capitalize on the effect. At least that medal makes something out of using the self-freezing items. For status resistance medals, even for 1 medal point, this medal is pretty mediocre, but it at least can do what it needs to well enough. Not a high praise, but it is at least more than what I could say for the medals below this one. The last few medals, in my opinion, are really just not very great. As a matter of fact, just like freeze resistance, they all take up their own tier. Beginning with the D tier, first plating really isn't very good. If you're in the Cave of Trials, it's alright, but you generally can't predict who enemies target, and if you rely on Kabu's redirection, you still have the issue of it not being worth 4 medal points to absorb only 1 hit and nothing else. Those 4 medal points would be better, say, increasing your defense throughout the entire battle, over just blocking any and all damage from 1 attack. In boss fights, this medal is even worse. Bosses never lead with their most powerful attacks, and as a result, this medal's effect feels wasted. The only time this medal really is any good is coincidentally in a solo bug run, and that's only because you can drop bugs you don't want fighting instantly with it by also doing a ton of damage with abominations. And if you want to get really creative, you can also combine this medal with Strong Start and use an expensive attack like Leaf's Ice Rain. There, it's okay, but when the best thing I can say about a medal is that it allows you to nuke your own friends and get away with it, that's not a good thing. First plating is a really mediocre medal, but if you really wanted to, it at least has some use. At least more than what I could say for the last couple of medals on this list. So, I have a question. How practical is Leaf Cloak? The bug with this medal equipped is targeted less in battle. In a game where Kabu's taunt exists, I have a very hard time seeing this medal be particularly very good. Area of effect attacks will still hit you without fail even if you taunt, and it's still entirely RNG that you get hit, it's just less. It's an okay medal if you don't have a plan in mind, but otherwise it's poor. There is no shortage of reliable defensive options in a game that already has plenty of RNG with unpredictable boss AI. You're just infinitely better at guaranteeing that at least some attacks will miss the cloaked bug than gambling on it not hitting. Especially since you're much better off only using 1 or 2 attackers than shifting your efforts to getting all 3 bugs out and dealing damage. If this medal worked like, say, Paper Mario's Pretty Lucky or Close Call, it'd at least have a unique property in allowing attacks to flat out miss, but as the medal is now, it's not good. Not in my eyes anyway. And now, the absolute worst defensive medal in the entire game of Bug Fables, the Everlasting Sapling, it's Poison Resistance. No contest. Like all the resistance medals before this medal only works to the poison status. Even for only costing 1 medal point and being available as early as Snake Mouth Den, this medal has 0 practical use outside of new players who are still learning action commands. Defensively, this medal is strictly worse than Poison Defender, which though is twice the medal cost, actually enables you to cancel out much more damage than you take without being poisoned. The fight with Spooter proves to be an excellent example of just that. By the time poison becomes enough of a threat where this medal is worth considering again, you have access to internal venom and other poison medals that make the status actually like concentrated adrenaline. When you have so many medals that build on the status and make it actually advantageous to be hit by, and it's a status that's not even that harmful without them, a medal like this that just reduces the odds of being afflicted is pretty lame. Even poisonous items don't offer this medal any extra value. The items you think this medal will be useful for, like Poison Cake, are outclassed by Crispy Donuts unless you were to use items to trigger poison. And other items like Danger Dishes heal so little HP, they're not even worth it compared to items like Succulent Cookies, which can bring you from 1 to 4 and gradually restore more TP too. Ultimately, it's an unimpressive medal with no real value, but what do you expect from a medal that blocks a status element when another medal exists that triggers poison from eating just about any other restoring item? Long story short, don't use this. It's terrible. That's all I got. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time, alright?